Chapter 519 to 520. Smash. Suddenly, one of the figures was kicked out and smashed on the wall hard. Cough cough. Damn it. At this rate, I am not even sure if we will be able to prevent him from going any further. We have no other option, Anko. We can't let him go any further. Thousands of lives are at stake here, said Shizune as she started healing Anko's injury while Hyuga Yui and Uchiha Izumi kept the enemy busy. Initially, there were 20 excellent shinobi who were in charge of the security of this refugee shelter. However, not long after one of the Akatsuki members invaded the refugee shelter, almost all the members of the security team died one after another at his hands. Mitarashi Anko was the only one left, and would have died too if it wasn't for the sudden and unexpected arrival of Shizune, Yui, and Izumi, who hastily saved her. Anyway, back to the battle. While Uchiha Izumi with her exceptional taijutsu prowess carried out a frontal offensive against the enemy, Hyuga Yui with her Byakugan actively rushed towards the enemy's back and directly used one of the strongest and deadliest jutsu that she can use currently. 8 trigrams, 64 palm, 2 palm, 4 palm, 8 palm, 16 palm, 32 palm, 64 palm, pa 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 pa. As soon as the attack was finished, Izumi and Shizune looked at each other at the same time, and can't help but exclaim in joy, it's done, his tenketsu should be sealed now. The gentle fist taijutsu of the Hyuga clan causes internal injury through the invasion of chakra. So, according to Shizune, Izumi, and Anko, the moment Yui successfully finished her attack, the enemy's flow of chakra is sealed, and it would be extremely difficult for him to move. However, unlike Shizune, Izumi, and Anko, Yui didn't have that joyful look. The reason being that with her Byakugan, she can clearly see that even if the enemy's tenketsu are sealed, it is of no use because chakra flow in his body is not stopped. Instead, more chakra is coming into his body from an external source, probably through those hundreds of black rods embedded into his body. And just as she expected, the enemy wasn't neutralized. Even after suffering from a whole set of 64 palms, he turned around and fiercely kicked Yui as if he was completely unaffected by the previous attack. Smash. Yui, who was kicked by the enemy, also smashed into the wall. What? Shizune and the others were stunned. How can he still move? After knocking out Yui, the Akatsuki member turned sideways and looked at Shizune, Izumi, who was still standing, and Anko, who was trying to get up again. While the enemy looked at the 3 kunoichi, the 3 kunoichi also looked at the enemy, especially at that purple ripple pattern that tends to exert a certain kind of unbearable oppression on them. The enemy not only has amazing insight because of bearing the rinnegan, but he can also use all sorts of weird attacks like launching missiles, creating 3 pairs of hands, create multiple faces on his head to keep track of 3 directions at the same time, bring out the giant saw from his back, open his head to fire some kind of laser beam and particle cannon, and many other weird attacks, including those black sticks that completely disrupts chakra if they pierce your body. Undoubtedly, the enemy fighting against the 4 Konoha Kunoichi is none other than Azura Path from the Pain Rakuto. And faced with the weirdness of his abilities, the 4 of them have been unable to do much. Izumi, who had long since activated her 3 Tomo Sharingan and has exceptional taijutsu skills, is unable to keep up with the enemy's speed and strength. Shizune's poison is completely ineffective against the enemy because he is a corpse and might even affect the comrades in such a small and narrow passage. Therefore, her abilities are greatly limited here. Anko's snakes are unable to do much damage because the enemy kills all the snakes using those black sticks with his 6 hands. And originally being a corpse with an external source of chakra supply, gently fist taijutsu that causes internal damage to the chakra pathway of the body is proving to be ineffective against him. Not to mention that they are unable to use ninjutsu at such a narrow passage because using ninjutsu would endanger the lives of villagers because the refugee shelter that is barely hanging would completely collapse. Taking all these disadvantages into consideration, they used everything they had. Shizune, Anko, and Izumi tried to keep the enemy busy in order to give Yui the opportunity to make a perfect sneak attack with the hopes of solving the enemy with that sneak attack. But unfortunately, it didn't work. Even after the attack was successful, it had no effect on Azura Path. It turns out that the enemy's weirdness makes him immune to the gentle fist taijutsu of the Hyuga clan. At this rate, none of them can resist the enemy. Staring at the rinnegan in the opponent's eye socket that seems to loom with extreme coldness, everyone felt a sense of despair. Yui, who had fallen not far away, struggled to get up, but midway she felt her throat becoming hot, and after spurting out a mouthful of blood, she collapsed on the ground and shouted unwillingly, "Damn it. Can't let him go any further, the civilians' lives are at stake here." After speaking so, she clenched her fist and used all her strength to get up again and put on the gentle fist posture. But even a fool could see that her combat effectiveness is not that high because her hands are trembling in fear and powerlessness. Azura Path glanced at the 4 Konoha Kunoichi indifferently, then raised a pair of arms, and said, "If early death is what you desire, then I shall fulfill your wish." Kaka kaka. Amidst the sound of machinery operating, many missiles appeared out of the arm raised by Azura Path, and these missiles were aimed at the 4 Konoha Kunoichi. Shizune was the least injured of the 4 rushed towards Yui, because she knew that with Yui's current state it would be very difficult for her to escape the attack of these missiles. Azura Pain didn't seem to care about Shizune's intention, and prepared to launch the missiles. Whyish, 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 whyish. But just as he was about to launch the missiles, several shurikens were shot from the other side of the passage. Azura Pain didn't move. He just tilted his head slightly and accurately avoided all the shuriken that was shot towards him, then moved his gaze towards the other side of the passage in order to verify the identity of the new enemy. Fire style, Fireball Jutsu. The moment Azura Pain looked in that direction, a fierce fireball came towards him. Azura Pain did not move to dodge the Fireball Jutsu. He just raised his hands over his chest and resisted the attack with his body. Through the observation of rinnegan, Azura Pain had already judged that the heat of this Fireball Jutsu is not too high, thus it will not cause him any damage, so using his body to resist it is more than enough. His expectations were correct. The fire did not cause him any damage, but just as the fire was about to dissipate, several figures rushed towards him under the cover of smoke and dust. Azura's Pain immediately noticed that the 2 figures rushing over at the front are 7 or 8 years old children, one with blonde hair, and the other with black hair. The 2 figures seemed to have a tacit understanding. Instead of carrying out a direct attack, both of them rushed past Azura Pain at the same time. On the other hand, 2 more figures rushed over, both of them also being 7 or 8 years old, but these 2 were different from the previous 2. These 2 had their Byakugan active, and immediately after appearing in front of him, the 2 simultaneously took gentle fist stance and carried out palm strikes. Looking at the 4 children surrounding him from the 4 sides, Azura Pain showed a disdainful smirk. A group of children? What exactly can a group of children hope to do here? Although disdainful, he decided to first deal with these children, and then deal with the other 4 kunoichi before going deeper into the refugee, in order to find the Jinchuriki of Kyubi. So, to meet the attack of the 2 children of the Hyuga clan, Azura Pain raised his hand, but soon found out that he can't raise his hands because his body is actually tied up by steel wires. Only then did Azura Pain understand that the 2 children who went past him earlier were not just rushing past him aimlessly to surround him from 4 directions. Instead, they had a plan in mind and used imperceptible steel wires to restrict his movements. The restriction of steel wires caused Azura Pain a moment of delay, and by the time he broke free of the restriction, the 2 children with the Byakugan had already issued their attack. Pa 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 pa. There was another burst of palm strikes coming towards him. And this time it was a frontal attack, unlike the sneak attack on the back carried out by Yui. The 2 children, Niji and Hinata, used their strongest attacks and directly aimed at the vital parts of the enemy in front of them. However, contrary to the 4 children's expectations, Azura Pain seemed completely uninjured. He just shook his head and arched his lips, revealing a flawless smile. With the chubby face of Azura Pain, it is obviously a naive smile, but in the eyes of the 4 children, this naive smile is extremely terrifying and creepy and really horrified the 4 children. Then, with the same smile, Azura Pain raised his 4 arms and aimed at the 4 children and shouted, "If you have nothing more, then just go to hell." Niji, Hinata-chan. Seeing that Niji and Hinata were in danger, Yui couldn't care about her injury and immediately rushed in front of the 2 of them and prepared to use Revolving Heaven in order to protect 2 of them. At the same time, Enko shot a snake from her sleeve. The snake coiled around Naruto and threw him towards Shizune. Izumi, on the other hand, appeared in front of Sasuke and immediately started to weave hand signs for the mud wall jutsu. Azura Pain doesn't seem to care about the 4 kunoichi trying to protect the 4 children. He is confident that even with their best defense, they will surely die. He raised his 4 hands that turned into particle cannons from which dazzling blue lights flashed and intensive chakra fluctuations occurred. The extreme heat and light emanating from the 4 particle cannons seemed to burn the skin of 8 people and brighten the originally dim passage to the point where nothing except for white was visible. The 4 children who were protected by someone or the other were trembling. At this moment, they deeply realized the danger that this enemy posed, the cruelty of the shinobi world, and the horror of incoming death. At the same time, they can't help but curse themselves for their foolishness in thinking that they might be able to defeat him. Facing the 2 particle cannons pointed towards her, even Yui was no different from the 2 children behind her and felt powerless. She bit her lip in unwillingness. She seemed to be in despair and panic, and shouted from the depths of her consciousness, as if these words are going to be her last words. Kuroto-kun, at least, these children must be protected. As soon as the voice fell, Yui's pure white Byakugan suddenly turned into the Royal Blue Tenseigan. At the same time, an extremely strong repulsive force appeared out of nowhere and slammed on the body of Azura Pain. Boom. Subjected to such a strong repulsive force, Azura Pain's body flew away at lightning speed, smashed onto one of the walls, and was instantly torn apart. Immediately after Azura Pain's body was destroyed, the dazzling light in the passage dissipated, and the Tenseigan on Yui's eye also disappeared and turned back into the previous Byakugan. At the same time, all the chakra in her body also seemed to be emptied in a moment. Shizen, Izumi, Anko, Naruto, Sasuke, Neji, Hinata, Yui. Seeing this scene, everyone was suddenly taken aback. The moment Yui shouted Kuroto's name along with a few more words, something happened that inexplicably killed such a powerful enemy in one shot. So everyone was shocked and looked at Yui with a doubtful gaze. What happened just now? How could he be insta-killed all of a sudden? Not to mention the 7 others. Even Yui was full of doubts. She does remember that Kuroto used some sort of fuinjutsu called transcription seal on her Byakugan a few days ago, but Kuroto never explained the effects of that fuinjutsu to her, and Yui didn't care too much about it because she trusts him. And now looking at the scene before her, she can't help but think whether this inexplicable thing that insta-killed Azura Pain had something to do with the transcription seal Kuroto used on her. Shizen cautiously walked towards the wreckage of Azura Pain and checked it briefly. After confirming a few things, she said to everyone in the passage, "There is no more chakra reaction." Izumi asked in a low voice, "Is he dead?" Shizen nodded. The rinnegan pattern in the eye seems to have faded. Anko leaned on the wall and said while staggering towards the Azura Pain, "In any case, this is just a puppet of the leader of the Akatsuki organization. Even if it is destroyed, it doesn't mean anything. We must first remove all those black sticks in his body to completely stop its functioning, otherwise who knows when he might start to function again." Shizen nodded and removed all the black sticks in the body of Azura Pain. After confirming that Azura Pain was completely destroyed, the eyes of several people once again looked at Yui, who was sitting on the passage, while leaning against the wall with the help of Hinata and Neji. Shizen asked in confusion, "Yui, what happened just now?" Because the moment Azura Pain was destroyed, it was using several particle cannons, and because of the light and heat emitted by the particle cannons, everyone's vision was disturbed, so no one could see what exactly happened that led to the destruction of Azura Pain. So, they could only ask Yui, because the most likely person responsible for the destruction of the Azura Pain seems to be her. But they have to be disappointed, as Yui shook her head. I don't know what's going on either. In fact, even Yui herself is not too sure as to what exactly happened just. She could only attribute it to that transcription seal Kuroto used on her a few days ago to be the cause of Azura Pain's destruction. But she didn't mention anything about the transcription seal, and all to anyone here, because the jutsu is related to Kuroto. After all, the scene here was too shocking. Such a powerful enemy was resolved so easily. Therefore, she didn't dare to explain anything to others without Kuroto's consent lest it might cause unnecessary trouble for him. Seeing that Yui doesn't really seem to know what exactly happened, Anko looked around and muttered, "Could it be possible that others are hiding nearby and they did something?" Shizen also became alert. Maybe it's a member of Amatsukami? A member of Amatsukami? On the ground. At the moment, Azura Pain was instantly destroyed in the refugee shelter, the Tendo Pain floating in the sky above Konoha and continuously releasing a very strong Shinra Tensei over the whole village. Fujin, who was leaning out of a bone spear and resisting Tendo Pain's Shinra Tensei with his iron sand, and Kuroto was in the Sannin mode and was protecting Kakashi, Kurenai, Hate, and Yugao while using a giant revolving heaven sense the change at the refugee shelter at the same time. The indifferent gaze of Tendo Pain gradually slanted, and he glanced in the direction of the refugee shelter in the eastern block. At the same time, a doubt sprouted in Tendo Pain's heart. Was it Yama, the leader of Amatsukami? Is he hiding in Konoha's refugee shelters? The destruction of Azura Pain was too abrupt, and he didn't even sense any attack coming. Moreover, Nagato's attention was divided due to controlling Pain Rakuto at the same time, and since most of his attention was focused on the Tendo Pain who was using a Super Shinra Tensei to destroy Konoha, therefore, he was unable to judge what exactly happened to Azura Pain at the refuge shelter. Based on the last message Nagato received from Azura Pain before its destruction, the sudden attack that destroyed was a very strong repulsive force very similar to his Shinra Tensei, but he is not certain. Although he can't judge what exactly happened, one thing he can confirm is that the Jinchuriki of Kyubi is also hiding in the refugee shelter. So, after a moment of hesitation, Tendo Pain stretched out his arm towards that particular refugee shelter and used Bansho Tenon. On Fujin's side, cough cough. Fujin coughed heavily as he removed the iron sand curtain that was protecting him. He had also sensed that the Shinra Tensei he had sealed in Yui's Byakugan using the transcription seal was activated not long ago, which meant that Yui's life was in real danger. Yui should be in the refugee shelter. Have Akatsuki members sneak there too? Thought Fujin with a frowned expression as he looked at the mess in front of him. Damn it. Although he knew that resisting Tendo Pain's Super Shinra Tensei with his iron sand would be pointless, he had no other option but to do so. What stands in front of Fujin is no longer the Konoha village, and he was very annoyed looking at such a scene. There is no doubt that both of the houses that his parent left behind must have followed suit along with the rest of the village. Jiraiya also got up from the ground and looked at the destroyed village. He was shocked and angry. At the same time, Kuroto, Shadow Clone, and the others that were protected by his Sage Chakra-enhanced revolving heaven also looked at the scene before them with heavy expressions. When Tendo Pain released Super Shinra Tensei, these people were present near the outer wall of Konoha where Satori was present before, so the impact of Super Shinra Tensei was quite less here, coupled with the protection of Sage Chakra-enhanced revolving heaven used by Kuroto, Shadow Clone, so they were relatively safe. But even then, the damage to the public and property is very serious. This makes everyone who loves Konoha dearly feel outraged by what Tendo Pain has done. Even Jiraiya, who rarely gets angry, was burning with rage as he looked up at Tendo Pain, Nagato, and while shouting in anger, he rushed towards Tendo Pain regardless of life and death. Tsunade, whose injuries were rapidly healing, crawled out of the ruins and looked at the scene with a gloomy expression, but unlike Jiraiya, she didn't madly rush towards Tendo Pain. Instead, she bit her finger, weaved hand signs, and slammed her hand on the ground. Kuchios no Jutsu. Poof. Amidst Tsunade's loud shout, a giant poof of white smoke surged. When the white smoke dissipated, a huge slug appeared in front of Tsunade. This slug is Tsunade's summon, the slug Katsuyu of the Shikatsu Forest, one of the 3 unexplored sage regions. As the slug Katsuyu looked at the surrounding mess, she was taken aback. Tsunade-sama, how did Konoha become like this? Tsunade shook her head heavily and said, I will talk about that in detail at a later date. Firstly, please treat the wounded. Yes, Tsunade-sama. Katsuyu nodded at Tsunade's instruction and immediately split into countless small slugs scattered all over Konoha and started to rescue the injured shinobi. Although the villagers have already entered the refugee shelter in advance and escaped this disaster, there are still countless Konoha shinobi on the ground who must have suffered a very serious injury because of the attack Tendo Pain used just now. If they are not rescued in time, then it is likely to cause thousands of casualties, which is something Konoha can't afford now. Fujin did not care about Tsunade and the others. Instead, he prepared a pair of iron sand wings and flew towards Tendo Pain. At this moment, the first priority is to solve Tendo Pain. No way, this guy is simply a human-shaped nuclear bomb. If he continues to toss around like this, then Konoha will undoubtedly be erased from the map of this shinobi world. Outside Konohagakure, several goshawks were flying in the periphery of Konoha village, searching from one place to another. After a long time, one of the goshawks finally approached a high cliff and saw 3 figures standing there. Looking at the 3 people, a light of wisdom flashed in the eyes of Goshawk. Immediately afterwards, the goshawk dived towards the high cliff at an extremely fast speed, as if it wanted to get closer in order to confirm the identity of the 3 figures standing on the high cliff. But before it could get close enough, countless pieces of paper came from all directions and wrapped around the goshawk's body one after another. Although the goshawk felt the crisis of death, it did not turn around and flee. Instead, it increased its speed and dived towards the cliff at a higher speed. The high-speed dive produced a whistling sound, which covered the hiss sound of exploding tag igniting. The goshawk still turned a deaf ear to the crisis, staring sharply at the 3 figures in front of him. Boom, boom, boom. Soon, a series of explosions sounded, and the goshawk was directly swallowed by the explosion. Nagato, who was standing on the edge of the cliff, briefly glanced at the explosion and then turned his head back. Conan on the side looked at Nagato and said, "The enchantment we have used is supposed to prevent the birds and animals from approaching here. It is very likely that the goshawk just now was not an ordinary bird, and our position has been exposed to the enemy." Toby on the side was immediately panicked. Oh no, what do we do, Nagato-senpai, Conan-senpai? At this rate, the plan will not continue. Nagato glanced at Toby for a moment, then turned back and said lightly, "Don't worry about it. It is very likely that the Gakage are going to be coming here. I am going to take care of them," Conan said with a worried expression. Or, "It is better to let me and Toby take care of the Gakage. You should reserve your strength to deal with Yama." Nagato thought about it a little, then nodded. Alright. Toby was immediately happy. Wow. I am going to fight the Gakage? Amazing. I must ask them what it feels like to poop. Nagato and Conan completely ignored Toby's words. Nagato focused his attention back on the several battlefields in Konoha, while Conan started to prepare traps in order to deal with the Gakage.